Now, there's a lot of dumb things you can do when you're buying a piece of property, but I've narrowed it down to a few of the mistakes that I see people make most often. So as I'm walking this property for a client, I'm going to talk through these things to make sure that you don't screw up when you're buying that dream property. The first dumb thing that people do when it comes to buying land is you'd be surprised how many people buy property that there is no legal access to. Just because you can see a dirt road or a gravel road or something on a map or on Google Earth or something like that doesn't mean that there's legal access on that road to the property. You've got to find out, is that property landlocked, or is there a deeded easement that goes with the property that is filed with the county that it's in? Or if it's not a county, Louisiana, the parish or whatever. But just because they show you, hey, look, here's a deeded access agreement, if that thing's not on file with the county, it does not count. You have to make sure that you've got access to the property, unless you've got a helicopter, and unless you want to use a helicopter to get everything in. If you want to build a cabin, can you helicopter your cabin in, or can you helicopter your septic tank and stuff like that? Make sure you've got access to the property. And then the other part of that is, just because a road exists and there is deeded access, doesn't mean that that road is in good shape or it's going to stay in shape. If you happen to be on a piece of property that has a road that's shared by 5 neighbors and the road's in horrible disrepair, is there a maintenance agreement on that property? Or if you want the road nice to your property, are you going to have to maintain it all the way from where it leaves the public road all the way up to your property? Making sure there's a maintenance agreement in place can save you a ton of money, because you may drive a pickup truck, but it could need like a jacked up Jeep or something to get to the property. Maybe the 3 neighbors past you have jacked up Jeeps and they can navigate the road fine, but your pickup and your wife's Tesla, well, it's not gonna make it down that road. So you're gonna have to spend a lot of money making the road nice to your property, and the people with the Jeeps behind you, well, they're just gonna get to benefit from it. So make sure not only is there access, but also that there's a maintenance agreement in place. The second really dumb thing that I've seen people do is overlooking zoning regulations and land use regulations. You can't build a cabin on everything. You can't camp on everything. There's zoning regulations in place in some places that restrict land to agricultural use only. You cannot put anything on that property. There's some that you cannot put a septic tank in because maybe it's in a floodplain or an environmentally protected area. So you may not be able to put a septic tank in. You may not be able to run power lines, again, because they've got to dig the holes, right? They got to drop the posts in. Well, in an environmentally sensitive area, maybe they can't put electric poles in. So if you don't see electric poles around, it's pretty smart to ask why sometimes. And then the other thing that is really smart to check out is, well, are there any HOA restrictions? Yes, I've seen properties as large as 500 acres that have HOAs on them, and those HOAs state you cannot camp on that property. You can't park an RV there, you can't park a car there, you can't have temporary structures. The only thing you can do until you have a house there is visit it and leave before the end of the night. Yes, there's HOAs that are that dumb and on that large of a property. So you need to understand that before you buy that property. I did another video recently on what type of land use you're going to use for the property, or you're going to have for the property, and making sure to look at specific things for that. On that, one of the things I talk about, people like to buy property with the expectation that, they're going to make a lot of money because they're going to subdivide it and sell off the little parcels. Well, one thing that you've got to check on ahead of time is, A, can you subdivide it? And B, what's the minimum lot size? Because there's some areas that you can't subdivide less than 35 acres if you want to put any type of infrastructure on there. And I'm sure in some states it's even more than that. So again, understanding those local land use regulations are really, really important. I always talk about this, especially if you're in an area that you don't necessarily live in or you haven't lived in for a long time. Get some local resources. A lot of people don't like to use realtors, but there are some realtors who really know what they're talking about, and they're worth their weight in gold for keeping you out of trouble and saving you money. It may be a realtor. It may be a local lender. It may be a local builder. It may be the guy that lives next door to the property that you see out in his truck fixing fence. Stop and talk to the neighbors and ask him, hey, is there anything weird about this property? Does the county have any special regulations? Is there an HOA that restricts stuff? Most people in this country are really nice if you approach them in a nice way, in a cordial way, and just talk to them. So make sure you're doing that. Make sure you get that team up front before you jump into a contract, or worse yet, before you buy the property. The third really dumb thing that I see people do is assume about utilities. The neighbor's got a power line, or, oh, I can always put a well in, or I can always put a septic in. And they close on the property and then they find out that they can't do it because the power line that's next door is actually about a quarter mile away. And for every section, every pole that runs, well, the utility company is going to charge you $5,000, and it's going to be 10 sections to get to your property, or 15 or 20. So you're going to be $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 just to get electricity to your property before you even start building. Don't assume anything with utilities. The other thing you can't assume is, hey, I see a well, you know, the neighbor there, he's got a well. Well, I can put a well on this property. But what you don't know is that well is 1,000 feet down and it has terrible water. That's an issue, because if you've got to dig 1,000 feet, I mean, I know here in Central Texas, if you go down 1,000 feet, it's going to cost you $35,000 or $40,000. So again, water could be really costly. Don't assume just because a neighbor has a well. Also, you may not even have water on your property. If you don't know anything about water tables, I would highly suggest you research that, because they can go deeper and shallower and deeper and shallower, and they can just have giant voids where the water doesn't exist. There's a piece of property west of Dripping Springs here where I live, and they were going to put a subdivision in, and they were going to do a shared community well. And the last count that I heard was that they dug 56 test wells and never hit water. There's wells all around out there. There's wells all over the hill country. But for some reason on that property, they never found water. The guy bought it, went in to try to find water to start his development, and lost his butt on it. Don't ever assume that you're going to find water either. Next thing is septic. Again, don't assume that you can get a septic permit. Even if you can get a permit, like if the property is in an okay area to get a permit, well, you still have to do test holes and do percolation tests to find out if the ground will percolate, if it will accept septic water, I'll say water, because if it fails the perk test, if you can't find a good place to put a septic system on there, they're not going to give you a permit to do that. Then you're left with incinerating toilets and stuff like that. And I don't know anybody that's ever built a dream house with an incinerating toilet. I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't do it. So moral of the story on this one is make sure you don't assume with your utilities. Talk to utility companies up front. Get estimates for what it would cost to run the utilities. If you want to run an underground electric line 500 feet, you better talk to a contractor to find out what they're going to have to cut through and how deep they're going to have to go, and give you a quote on what it's going to cost to do that. Again, that's something that could cost you $30,000 or $40,000 in a heartbeat if they're having to cut through granite or limestone. So make sure that you're finding out ahead of time, A, is it possible? B, what is it going to cost me? And C, is all of that within your time frame and your budget to do what you want to do on the property? The fourth thing, oh my gosh, and this is probably the worst and the most common, is people that don't get surveys done. The listing says it's 10 acres. Okay, great. Well, the neighbor next door thinks he owns 5 acres of that 10 acres. And then when you go after you close and you start putting up a fence, now all of a sudden you're in a lawsuit with a neighbor over land that you thought you owned and he thought he owned. So do not skip the survey ever. A lot of times sellers will have a survey that they'll provide you, but guys, in today's litigious society, if that survey is more than a year or 2 old, I would definitely buy a new survey, and I would buy it as the buyer. I wouldn't ask the seller to provide me one. That way I can vet the survey company, find a survey company that I trust, and have them provide me that survey. So this is a short one overall, but do not forego getting a new survey on a property. My gosh, it can lead to massive, massive headaches. All right, the fifth dumb mistake I see people made is ignoring environmental testing and soil testing. Again, I talked about it a little bit ago. Not all soil's created equal. You can't always put a septic system in. You can't always put a foundation in for a house, or you can put a foundation in, but it requires a special one. So you've got to get these tests done before you buy it. Generally speaking, if you're under contract, if everybody's happy with the contract, a seller will let you run these tests during that contract period, because if you find something that you don't like, well, the seller probably needs to know that their property may not be worth what they're asking for it because of this thing that you found during those tests. So sellers are typically going to be okay with this. And on that same note, again, septic systems, you have to get a percolation test for a septic system. You have to find out if the ground will accept the effluent. That's what the poop water is called, is effluent. So you have to get those percolation tests done ahead of time before you enter into the contract, or before you close on the deal, sorry. The other thing is foundations. Okay. You would think that you can just put a foundation in. There's a house, you're gonna pour a concrete slab, or you're gonna do a pier and beam foundation, and you're good, right? That's not always the case. I was talking to a guy recently, and it was for a larger building, but they had to go in and remove 8 feet of soil, 8 feet deep, and then backfill it with road base and compact it up, okay? Because the soil that was there was not suitable for a foundation that would hold the building that he was building. Now, we're not talking an apartment complex, we're not talking, a high-rise building, we're talking a kind of a warehouse structure. But the soil that was there would not support it, so he had to dig 8 feet down, remove all of that soil, and fill it back in. So again, make sure you understand the soil where you're building before you close on these deals. Another soil issue that it's an environmental issue. If you're buying a property that was an old homestead, you need to check. A lot of times, old farmers, they had 200 and 300 gallon diesel tanks on the property that may have rusted out. They've leached diesel into the ground or oil into the ground. Or, a lot of farmers would take oil and pour it out along their fence lines to keep the grass from growing up, to limit the maintenance, which back in the 1940s and 50s, okay, that was a normal deal. But nowadays, we don't do that anymore. So understand that, okay, if this was an old farm, maybe you want to get a phase 1 environmental done, an assessment that goes and tests for contaminants and things like that in the property, especially, like I said, if there's an old barn or an old shop, or even old remnants of like a diesel tank or a propane tank or something like that on there. Doing those environmental tests wouldn't be a bad idea. And then the other thing is, what is the actual ground light under what you can see? There's a property that I absolutely love in Colorado, and I would love to buy this property, but I went out and I walked it, and the lot next door, now these are only 1 acre lots, the lot next door, about 3/4 of it was one giant granite boulder. It wasn't a bunch of boulders like a granite field. It was one hunk of granite. It goes into the ground close to the boundary between these two property lines. And I'm standing there looking at it, and there's a giant boulder here that kind of slopes down here. And this is the property that I'm looking at over here. And I'm going, okay, maybe if I buy this property, I want to get somebody to go out there and dig some cores for me so I can find out exactly how much room down do I have, or can I dig a well on that property? Do I have enough room to go down to put a septic system in? Again, what kind of costly excavation is there going to be to do what I actually want to do there? So if you're in an area that's known for large rocks, like Colorado, like the Texas Hill Country, make sure you understand what's under the ground also before you go ahead and close on it. All right, the 6th dumb thing that I've seen people do is forgetting about floodways. It's really easy to check floodways. Go to the FEMA website, I think it's FEMA.gov, and you can pull up maps in the flood map area, and you can type in addresses and it'll take you there, and it'll tell you, hey, is this in a floodway? And there's different zones, there's A, B, C, and X, and is it in a 100-year, is it in the floodway, is it in the flood zone, is it a 100-year flood zone, is it a 500-year flood zone? Or is it completely out of all flood zones? Okay, so that's how you find out. But understanding that ahead of time, especially if you're looking at something that has a nice little draw or a creek or a river running through it or something like that. I mean, case in point, west of Austin, Texas, there is the Highland Lakes chain. And the first lake out there west of town is Lake Travis. It's a big lake. And FEMA will not allow you to build a structure below 720 feet of elevation. Well, most of the shoreline is below 720 feet of elevation. So if you didn't check and you didn't know, again, those local regulations, say it over and over and over, find your team, get you somebody that knows. Guys always beat around the bush, but agents are really good at this. You just got to find the right agent. And if you don't trust realtors, then, find a lender or a contractor or something like that. If you drive around a lake area, you'll see contractors that are building houses. Stop in and ask them. But in this case, I had a client, and we found this out ahead of time. The elevations, okay, well, their elevation was about 703 feet, so they had to build up 18 feet. Now, you can have the pilings in the ground, but they had to build up 18 feet before they could put the floor of their house. Now, They were fine, they had the money, they did it, and they understood the risks involved, and that was fine. But they knew ahead of time. If they had planned to just go in and build a house, because next door there was a house that was built way before any of those rules went into play, and it was on a slab. And if the lake ever gets to full pool, well, that house is going to be covered in water. Well, you can't do that anymore, so that's why they put these regulations in place. And if you were going in thinking you were going to put in a $20,000 slab, and now all of a sudden you've got to elevate your house 20 feet up in the air, you're going to spend an additional $150,000 that you didn't realize you were going to spend. So again, check out the flood maps. They're really easy to check. Make sure, even on a property that you don't think is in the floodway, check it anyway. Please check it anyway before you close on it. Another really dumb thing I see people do is not calculate holding costs, or not fully understanding what the costs of a property are going to be. I mean, obviously, if you're closing out a title company, which you should always close out a title company or a fee office or with an attorney, or whatever state you're closing in, but close with somebody where they can give you title insurance, so you understand, hey, there's an HOA here, and the HOA is $12,000 a year. It's going to cost me $1,000 a month just to have raw land. Okay, that's something that you want to know up front. And then you have property carrying costs that can change. If you're in a rural area that's got gravel roads and stuff like that, okay, taxes may be low to start, but that could change with the development. Maybe they come through and put a nice road in and you have to pay an additional tax on that. So find out ahead of time, go to the county tax office or talk to somebody local who understands what the future development for that area looks like. And speaking of that, property taxes, make sure you understand the property tax structure. Okay, Texas, we're known for having a little bit higher property taxes than other locations. Find somebody who really understands what that means, because in Texas, you can get what's called an ag valuation, an agricultural valuation, or you can get a wildlife valuation. You can have forestry valuations. Anyway, they're all different things that can make your tax burden on a property really low, which is awesome, because I mean, I've seen places like my grandfather's place, almost 100 acres, and I think they pay about $1,000 a year in taxes. That's great. It was meant to help farmers. But if you buy that property and don't realize that the farmer hadn't run cattle on there in 4 years, and you don't put cattle on there the first year, if you don't have ag in place for 5 out of the previous 7 years, you lose that valuation. Now all of a sudden your $1,000 tax bill becomes $20,000 and you had no idea. So make sure you understand what the structure of the taxes are on the land, if there are property taxes in that state. And if it seems like the taxes are really low, okay, that's good, but understand why and understand if that could change. And then a couple of other things that can impact the carrying cost. First of all, you may have a place that's at the end of a 5-mile long dirt road, and it's heaven to you, and it's quiet, and there's one other neighbor out there. And I mean, you have, in your mind, you have struck the mother lode of the perfect place for you. But if you don't make sure and check ahead of time, you could have a shared maintenance agreement on that road. And if you and one neighbor have to maintain 5 miles of road, that could get really expensive, especially if it's in an area where it snows or rains a lot or something like that. So understand if there's shared maintenance agreements on access roads. And then along those same lines, the same 5-mile road that is so peaceful, and you want to build a cabin out there, and that's been your dream forever, and it's got this great view, and there's a creek running through it and all this other stuff. Okay, that's great, but you want to build a 1,000 square foot cabin, but it's really nice, it might cost you $300,000 to build it or something like that. And then you get the insurance bill, and you realize that not only are you at the end of a 5-mile long road, you're also 10 miles from the nearest fire station. And you have a higher insurance cost because it's a wildfire prone area. And trust me guys, California is not the only place with wildfires. Colorado's not the only place with wildfires. My premiums in Texas are going up because of one single wildfire that popped up about 5 years ago, probably 15 miles from my house, nowhere close to me. My premiums have almost doubled in the last 3 years since that fire. So the further you are from access to somebody that can put out a fire, insurance is going to raise your rates. So if you dream about being way at the end of a road and have nobody around you, make sure you can afford that insurance first. Eighth, really dumb thing that I've seen people do is buy on emotion and not on strategy. And I've seen both sexes do it, men and women. Look, you're standing there and you've got this amazing view. And I mean, you're looking across 5 mountain ranges, and you can just imagine the sun coming up in the morning, and you know, it's the perfect view. There's no trees in your way, and oh my God, this is the perfect property. And so you buy it, and then you start talking to contractors, and you bring them out to the lot, and they're like, oh yeah, I've seen this lot. What are you going to do here? You can't build on this lot. You know, and it's after you've spent the money. So don't buy on emotion. Please don't buy on emotion. Make sure that you have a strategy. Make sure that you have it vetted, that you have, again, that local team, those contacts. Talk to the contractors ahead of time, even when you're under contract, because if you lose $1,000 or $2,000 in earnest money or something like that during the contract, it's a hell of a lot better than closing on a $200,000 piece of property that's absolutely worthless to you because you can't do what you want. And when you're looking at it, I mean, look, even if you plan to give property to your kids or grandkids or something like that, that doesn't always work out. So you do need to keep an eye on, can you actually resell the property? So you have to do a couple of things. You have to look at appreciation trends. Land in that area actually appreciate, and most land really doesn't appreciate more than 1 or 2% a year. And so if you're getting that, okay, you're getting appreciation, and if you put improvements on there, it's going to be more valuable. So you've at least got some type of exit strategy if you have to sell it. On the other hand, is this land in the absolute middle of nowhere, and you're excited and your emotions are running high because you're buying 100 acres for $1,000 an acre. Well, the reason it's $1,000 an acre is because nobody else wants to be out there. And even if you have access to water and there's a road and there's electricity out there, is anybody else in the future actually going to want to drive way in the hell out in the middle of Del Rio, Texas? Not Del Rio, that's an actual town, but north of Del Rio, there's land out there that's dirt cheap because nobody wants to go out there. So again, you have a dream of living on 500 acres. Well, that's fine, but if you get sick and you have to move somewhere that's closer to a hospital, are you actually going to be able to sell what you built out there? You built a 4-bedroom home and, you know, a really, really nice place, and you put $1 million into this property. Well, is anybody going to give that to you on the way out? Better calculate that ahead of time. And as we're going through this, it always helps me to reiterate to you, a lot of times people watching my channel they're looking in other states. Like you may be in another state and you're looking to buy something in Central Texas. It's a great location for people to move to. You know, personally, I'm in Central Texas, and eventually I want to have a bigger piece of property in Colorado. Make sure that you have somebody in that area where you're going that you trust. Me personally, I'm a realtor. I've been a realtor for 12 plus years now. I have 3 realtors in Colorado, in different parts of Colorado, because, you know, the southeastern part of Colorado is completely different from the western part of Colorado, which is completely different from the north central part of Colorado. There's different laws, there's different rules, there's different ground types, there's all different kinds of things. So I have 3 different realtors in the state of Colorado that help me in different areas. And when you get to a place as big as Texas, or, you know, call it Wyoming or Montana or whatever, those are big locations that can be vastly different from one part to the next. So make sure that you have a local team that you can reach out to and talk through these problems with. Not just that, like, you don't want an agent that he's just going to be like, or she, they're going to be like, oh, you want to buy this property? Okay, let's go buy this property. No, you want an agent who's actually going to talk through the issues with you, kind of like this video, talk through the issues that you might face, tell you or ask you questions about what you want to do on the property. Get to the point where they can tell you, hey, yeah, this is a good property for you, or no, you really can't do what you want to do here. That saves you a ton of research time. And I know the internet's convenient and you can do it at night in your underwear and all of that, but it will never, ever, ever beat the value of having somebody local in that area. So again, if you need somebody in any state, ask me if you don't know anybody there. Chances are I know a realtor, or I know a realtor who knows a realtor in the exact spot you want to be. That's what happens when you are in the business as long as I am. You meet a lot of people, and so use me for that. Again, it'll save you a lot of time, and you can't believe all the reviews you always read on Google. So ask somebody who's actually met the people, and I'll know whether or not you actually want to work with them.